Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another Webinar Wednesday with Can Do. I'm Jessica Kaplan. I'm a programs manager here at Can Do, and I've got the pleasure of being your moderator this evening. Our webinar today is on achieving your nutrition and fitness goals. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors that make this webinar possible. That's EMD Serono, Genentech, Sanofi, Viatris, and Zenas Biopharma. We have some upcoming virtual programs we would love for you to attend. Like I said, I can't believe it's already November, and these are some of our programs leading into the end of the year. We'd love for you to join us and end the year strong. We've got a care partner meetup tomorrow. Next week, we have our jumpstart on fueling healthy habits. Then we have Your Questions Answered on diet and exercise. And in December, we've got our Black Community Meetup. To help make today's program a little easier, I just want to point out some Zoom features. So we have a chat box and we also have a Q&A box. Please put all your questions in the Q&A box and reserve the chat feature for comments or, words of encouragement. We also have a closed captioning feature if anyone needs that. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website by tomorrow evening and also emailed out to everybody in a follow-up email. I'll also post the link to today's presentation slides in the chat. Do that now. Today, I'm joined by two incredible and knowledgeable healthcare professionals. Ilana Katz-Sands is a neurologist practicing in New York City, and Gretchen Hawley is a physical therapist in Western New York. I want to thank you both for joining us. And I'm also from New York, so we've got a New York crowd here today. So I will pass it off to Ilana.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's wonderful to be here tonight with all of you. We can kind of just jump right in. So to start out with our learning objectives, the things we're going to talk about this evening, we're going to start by talking about how healthy nutrition and working on your physical activity can impact MS and overall wellness. Then we're going to talk about the advantages of consistency over just having intensity. And then we're going to end by talking about some tips for successful goal setting. And we're going to work on becoming familiar with some healthcare and community professionals and resources and just how to get help in this entire area. So our first objective is to learn how healthy nutrition and physical activity can impact MS and also impact your overall wellness. So I'll start by talking a little bit about diet. I can talk, as some of you probably know, for a very long time about diet. This is my particular area of interest for research. We're not going to get too sciencey this evening since our focus is going to be more on kind of how to implement all of these things. But I did want to give you just a little bit of background, just in terms of how we think about how our diets can really impact not just, things like that we usually think about, like body weight and, cardiovascular profile, but really have a serious impact on MS as well. So I think of diet as kind of two main buckets in terms of how the effects can happen. One is indirect effects that are mediated by comorbidities that we think about as associated with worse outcomes in MS. And so these are the things I was just mentioning. So things like obesity, having an adverse cholesterol profile, meaning having a high LDL cholesterol or a low HDL cholesterol, having other vascular risk factors like diabetes and high blood pressure. All of those things have been associated in the MS literature with a worse MS prognosis over time, both with increased risk for future disability, increased risk for more lesions seen on MRI. And so, of course, diet is related to those things. We can use our diet to help us decrease the likelihood that we're going to have those comorbidities, or to help us, if we have them, to help us more actively manage them. So that's one way that diet can be helpful. But I think for me, the part that's even more interesting are the effects that are really directly related to the diet. And so that is things like the direct effects of dietary metabolites, which I'm going to go over in a moment, as well as effects that are mediated through the gut microbiota. And so that involves both effects on which bacteria are living in the gut. Our diets are a huge driver of that, as well as what metabolites the bacteria that are living there produce. So I'll just give you this schematic here, which is a little complicated, but I think really nicely illustrates how this whole thing works. So we start out with thinking about these foods that we have here, and you can see here some of the chemical structures of some of the components that are in food. So I think we should be thinking about foods in the same way that we think about our pharmaceuticals, right? These are bioactive compounds. They bind to receptors throughout the body the same way that medications do, actually. Another thing we have to think about, we see this arrow here. I had just mentioned that our diet in adulthood is the biggest driver of how our microbiota, the bacteria that live in our gut, um, how they look. So, what the composition is, and also what metabolites they produce. And so, when we take both of these things together, this is what we end up with is this figure here. And what we can see is those little, bugs that are in the gut and these metabolites that come directly from the diet. These have really widespread effects throughout the body. So they diffuse from the gut into the bloodstream, into the peripheral circulation. They bind to receptors throughout the body. So on our, endocrine organs, right? So thinking about receptors, for example, in the liver, in the pancreas, on our immune cells, they actually also cross the blood-brain barrier and they can bind directly to cells in the brain. And so that this, I think, provides us a very nice mechanistic view of how what we eat can really have a direct impact on MS. Okay, so I'm going to give you just a little bit of brief background on some of the work that has been kind of more directly done from a clinical standpoint. And so this is work that our group completed. There are many other studies out there. This is just one example. And so what we did in this particular study is we looked at our patient population. This is from a sample of over 500 people living with MS who've been seen at our center. And what we did was we looked at their dietary habits using a survey called the MEDAS, which is a Mediterranean diet screener. And it's 14 questions and it just asks people a few brief things about some of their dietary habits. And they get a score from 0 to 14. And that tells us how well their diet aligns with the Mediterranean pattern, with a higher score indicating higher Mediterranean diet alignment. What we did was then we mapped that against things like MS-related disability. So the main marker here was something called MSFC, which people may be familiar with from other research studies. It's the multiple sclerosis functional composite. And so that's a composite measure of three things. It's time 25-foot walk, which is walking speed, 9-hole peg test, which tells us about, hand coordination and dexterity, and then the symbol digit modalities test, which tells us about cognition. And we put those three things together. And what you can see here in this graph is that there is a nice relationship between people's level of alignment of their diet with a Mediterranean pattern and their MSFC score. So people who have better alignment of their diet with a Mediterranean pattern had a better multiple sclerosis functional composite. And that was after we controlled for all these factors that you see here on the left. So these are things like age, sex, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, body mass index, physical activity levels, sleep, and then whether they had these medical conditions like hypertension, diabetes, high cholesterol, whether they smoke. The thing that actually was the best fit in terms of that model was actually their diet. So that kind of showed us right there that I think we were onto something. The other thing that we thought was really interesting was we then looked at in this same sample, we looked at, okay, so we have like an objective measure of MS-related disability in the MSFC, but what about in the way patients feel on a day-to-day basis? And so for that, we looked at not only those MSFC components that are listed out there, but we used surveys. So for example, the multiple sclerosis impact scale, the fatigue severity score, the multiple sclerosis walking scale, the perceived deficits questionnaire, which asks people how they think that their cognition is doing. And then we also looked at mood, depression, and anxiety. So these are common things that people who are living with MS experience. And what we found was, again, a pretty high correlation between people's dietary habits and how they felt on a day-to-day basis. And so we thought that was pretty interesting as well. Um, So I think a really big point that I wanted to make is, yes, I just showed you some nice evidence that suggests that following a diet that aligns well with a Mediterranean pattern seems to be somewhat protective from a disability and symptom management standpoint. But I think a really big point that I want to make is there are a lot of different patterns that are currently being studied, and most of them don't have great evidence in terms of being used as a disease modifier. We haven't gotten to that point yet. We're only just now getting to those kinds of clinical trials, and our group is doing one right now that I would be happy to tell people about offline, or you can check it out on clinicaltrials.gov if you want to read about it. But only now are we kind of getting to these trials that really look more at diet as a disease modifier. But we have a lot of patterns, all of the ones that are listed here have at least pilot clinical trials or small phase 2 type clinical trials that have looked at diet for symptom management. And all of these different patterns have actually been shown to be helpful in reducing symptoms like fatigue, for example, or improving mood. And so, again, it's a whole different discussion in terms of like which pattern might be better for you. But what I tell people for now is all of these patterns are under study. I think they're all pretty interesting. If there's one that really appeals to you, then you should, go for that. We'll talk at the end in terms of how you go about doing that. But any of these patterns that speaks to you, I think is an okay one to try. So just to give you an example, as we listed out all those different patterns, again, our group has been focused on a Mediterranean pattern. To give you an idea of kind of what the research has looked like, I'll just show you this example. And again, all of the other studies kind of look similar to this. We had a few years ago randomly assigned 36 women with MS to either follow this dietary intervention, which is a Mediterranean intervention, or to continue their usual habits. And what we found was that even though the trial was actually all about clinical trial feasibility and not really about results, we had results. We were pleasantly surprised by that. And so what we found was that people in the intervention group compared to the non-intervention group improved. And even though it was only for 6 months, they had improvements in their fatigue level, in the survey that we did about impact of their MS symptoms on their daily life. And actually, people had stabilization or improvement in their disability scores. So we thought that was all exciting enough to move us forward to continue doing this entire line of work. And so that's what we've been working on. So given that I've just told you that all of these different patterns are under study, and for now I would consider them all reasonable, what does that mean? That's a very common question. It's like, well, what should I actually do? So a group of us have gotten together. I get to work with this really wonderful group of people as part of the National MS Society's Wellness Research Working Group. And we said, okay, well, we're working on this research, but people who are living with MS really want answers to these questions right now. So what can we tell them? What do we feel like we have enough evidence for that we could really recommend? And so these are our recommendations. The recommendations are to prepare your meals at home as much as possible. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that. We want you to incorporate colorful fresh fruits and vegetables daily. If you choose to eat grains, we recommend that you choose whole grains over refined grains. And we would like you to avoid or really limit processed foods and added sugars as much as possible. And these recommendations are listed on the National MS Society's website, which is listed here. Now I'll turn it over to Gretchen.
All right. So kind of using some similar, um, I guess, types of information, but how does this relate to physical activity with MS versus nutrition and diet with MS? And so much of nutrition and diet really does overlap with physical activity. But with the first thing that I think is really important to know about physical activity and MS is that it can help with so many things. And as a physical therapist, a lot of people come to me looking to improve their strength or balance or walking, which physical therapy and exercise in general can actually help with those things. But it's so much more than that. Physical activity, physical therapy, movement, whatever we want to call it. Of course, it can help with balance, strength, and walking, but it can also help with muscle tightness and spasticity and even our breathing and aerobic endurance. It can help with vertigo. It can help with fatigue. It can help with numbness and tingling and pins and needles in our hands and feet. There's so many ways to exercise to improve various MS symptoms that you might not have even thought of because we tend to just associate physical activity with strength and walking. But for a lot of people, if we can improve those other things, if we can improve spasticity, if we can improve how much you're feeling the ground from your feet, if we can improve your fatigue, then your walkings can improve as well because those things might be limiting your walking. So it can help with so many different areas, and it's going to depend on what you're doing to in your exercise routine because again there's different forms of exercise. But one thing that I'm really passionate about talking about is it really possible to get stronger and to walk better when a disease like MS is involved? Because it can feel like it's not possible. It's a progressive disease and it's maybe you're just going to keep getting weaker. So many people think that, and fortunately, that is not the case. It is possible to get stronger, but a lot of it is based on your goals and the type of exercise that you're doing. So, when we're talking about multiple sclerosis, I want you to picture um, three different things for me here. I want you to picture your brain, and then I want you to picture the Hulk. So, your brain has to tell your muscles to move, to flex, so that they flex like the Hulk. We're all the Hulk in this situation. But what a lot of people forget is that when you have MS, it's we're missing a piece. It's not just your brain talking to your muscles. It's how does it get there? And that is to insert picture in your mind of nerves, your neural pathway. In order for your brain to get your muscles stronger, to flex, to move, to be the Hulk, there has to be communication between the two. And that's what our neural pathways do. It's kind of like Wi-Fi between your brain and every single muscle in your body. And there is a specific way to exercise to activate neuroplasticity versus to just strengthen muscles. And we'll talk on the next slide about a form of exercise that can help. But some things that can help with neuroplasticity would be things like alertness. So if you're doing an exercise, you should be focusing on that exercise, not on your grocery list or what you need to do tomorrow or what you're going to wear later today. Being very alert. Also, adding a challenge. It could be something fun like you play your favorite song and you want to do 10 repetitions by the time the chorus ends. But adding some type of challenge is a great way to get neuroplasticity working for our exercises as well. Um, you can also add some urgency, which kind of goes along with challenge, but again, can you get a certain number of reps in a certain number of minutes? Or can you make it more challenging by adding balance into the equation, by standing on something slightly uneven? You want to be safe with what you choose, but these are some ways, there's lots, but some that you can activate neuroplasticity. Okay. So, regular exercise versus functional exercise. So, a lot of people with MS that go to physical therapy or a personal trainer, gym, whatever it might be, they want to get stronger and for good reason, it is possible. But what I hear a lot is, I've been exercising for months, even maybe going to physical therapy for months, and I'm getting stronger, but climbing stairs isn't any easier, or walking isn't any easier, or my balance is better, but I'm still falling. And so individual components are getting better, but it's not carrying over into daily life. And in my opinion, the main point of getting stronger when you have MS is so that your daily life feels easier and less cumbersome and safer. So the way to do that is through functional exercise, which is different than traditional or orthopedic exercise. Functional exercise means choosing specific exercises based on your goals and choosing specific locations in your home based on your goals, as well as specific positions based on your goals. So I'm going to give you a quick example. So if you've been to physical therapy before, a very common exercise that is great as an orthopedic exercise, but not really the most functional for MS, is a straight leg raise. So, with this exercise, you're lying on your back and you slowly lift one leg up, your knee is straight, and slowly down. It's a great traditional exercise to strengthen your hip flexors. But what you might notice if you have MS is that you might be able to get really good at this exercise, but then you go to stand up and your hip flexors aren't working. But they worked great when you were lying down. Why is that? It's because that carryover in that picture, those three things again, your brain, your muscles, and the neural pathway, those weren't carrying over in a standing position. So it would be more effective to do a standing based exercise if the goal you're working towards is walking or climbing stairs. If we could stop sharing the slides for a second, I just want to show you a quick visual on how to determine what a functional exercise might be. So I'm just going to move my chair out of the way. So again, I'm just going to stick with the goal of walking. If you have a goal of improving your walking, then you want to think about what are the components to walking. Walking requires shifting your weight forward, that's step one, bending your knee, lifting your toes, bringing your knee up, straightening it, putting your heel down, and all while you were doing that, you were standing on one leg. So that's 7 different things just to take a single step forward. So a functional exercise would be any of those 7 components done individually as an exercise. So the first thing was we had to shift our weight forward. This is an exercise. You could do 10 repetitions of that, or 5 or 15, however many you can do. You can hold on to something. I don't have anything right here, but you can hold on. And number 2 is bending your knee. Heads up, this is often the hardest one. So if it's too challenging, try it sitting down, try it lying down. There's lots of different positions. But that's how you would best determine functional exercises. What is the goal you're working towards, and what are the individual components necessary to do that activity? So, moving on to our second objective here, which is learning about the advantages of consistency over intensity, because all the stuff we talked about so far is great if you're doing it. And so often, consistency is one of the hardest parts for all of us, even MS aside. So we're going to dive into some tips for that. So I came across the photo on the right side of the screen a few years ago, and it has been seared in my memory because at the time, I was a firm believer in my mind that consistency looked like that top bar. Like that is truly what I thought consistency meant. Go big or go home every day that you can. Or even if there was 1 or 2 days that had nothing in it, that wasn't colored, the days that I did whatever it was, exercise, eat healthy, stay hydrated, those bubbles would be fully blue. And so when I saw what consistency actually meant, it was a real eye opener for me. So for those saying that 7 days a week is what would be consistent for you or what you think would be consistent, it absolutely can be, but it doesn't have to be the same level of intensity every single day, especially as we're talking about multiple sclerosis and varying symptoms. Your best effort one day would look very different from your best effort another day. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that you were any less consistent or that you put any less effort in. So I love this image of what consistency actually means. Some days it might be 100% effort. Other days it might be 5%, but that still counts. You still did something. Activity tips for consistency, and we'll do an exercise demo and get into some more meal type tips as well. But exercise snacks, it can be so helpful on the days that you really either don't have time or energy or your schedule has changed and you can't exercise. Exercise snacks, which are just small in one exercise, few repetitions, do them throughout your day, can be so helpful. And research shows that doing exercises throughout the day is equally as effective as exercising all at once. So if you can do, and I'll demonstrate in a second so you'll know what I'm talking about, but if you could do a few seated or standing marches while you're brushing your teeth or after you go to the bathroom and just do 5 to 10, then every time you go to the bathroom, you're going to do 5 to 10 of those. That is an exercise snack. Or if you're standing waiting for your coffee to brew or your tea, maybe you're doing some heel raises. Doesn't matter what the exercise is, but you can split it up in small chunks throughout the day. Also, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, changing positions. If some days standing exercises are too hard for you, do them seated. If that's too hard, try them lying on your side in bed. There's so many exercises you can do in bed, so many that you can do seated. So change the position so that it feels better for your body on that day. That doesn't mean you're doing any less than what you did the day before. You're just changing position so that it's working better and you can be successful at that exercise. So I wanted to give you just a quick little demo of some seated exercises. I prefer seated exercises for the majority, if not all, of my clients that I work with because they're feasible. That so many of us sit a lot throughout the day. And if you only have standing exercises and you don't have the energy or the strength that day, then you're kind of out of luck. But if you have seated exercises, you can do these from your couch, from the bed, from a chair like I'm in now, but ideally not a wheeled chair. So I'm just going to kind of go through a bunch. We're not necessarily going to do a whole routine by any means, but if you're able to, I'd encourage you to give them a try. I've got my rollators and tools back here. Okay, so we're going to start with our upper body. So feet flat on the ground, sitting up tall, engage your core muscles if you can, and just punching forward. And with any of these exercises, you can make them as intense or as light as you wish. So if you want to make this more intense, I have a rib injury right now, so I'm not going to go super intense, but you can really punch hard, add some power. You could go faster. You could add more motion. So just making the exercise more intense versus just going slow and steady. You're not adding too much power behind it, but you're just moving, which is fantastic. So this is one of my favorite ones that I like to do for cardio. Also, arm swings is a great one, especially if you're doing something like seated high intensity interval training. The way to do that is to do a high intensity exercise with a low intensity. This is often my low intensity exercise that I'm alternating between. In terms of upper body, we can also do some upper body jumping jacks. If you don't have the shoulder mobility to come this high, scoot forward a bit, you can come to a T. You can even just come down here. I want you to remove all expectations. So many of us, we set the expectation so high, and if we can't do it, we just stop exercising. Lower the bar. This is great. This is a fantastic exercise. So just a few upper body ones. I like to pretend I'm rolling a punching bag. You're staying pretty far away from your chest, so you're not going to be hitting your belly, hitting your chest. Roll, 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 staying at shoulder height. And then, of course, we can reverse as well. So those are some of my favorite upper body ones. Talking about core, I'll move to this side so you can see. So we're at the edge of our chair. Hands can be here, here, or here, and you're going to hinge backwards and come back up. If this is really challenging, which for some people this is very challenging, then you could even work on, if you're just relaxed right now, can you pull yourself up tall and then relax and pull yourself up? These are really great ways to work our core muscles throughout the day. Again, you could just do 5 of these And then in 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, try 5 more. And you're doing those throughout the day. Another seated exercise I love and give a lot, if not every patient that I work with, is seated marching. So you're just slowly lifting up. It's going to be easier if you recline backwards. It doesn't matter if one side lifts higher than the other. It doesn't matter if one side doesn't lift at all. Still try. Neuroplasticity is the ability of your brain to create that connection. So as we were talking about before, we've got our brain, our Hulk. What if that connection, that neural pathway is not there? Neuroplasticity is the ability to find it and strengthen it, but only if you're actually doing the movement, even if there's no movement. So this exercise might not seem like anything to you, but if I stand up, watch, so this is my hip flexor that's bending up. If I stand up, it's the same movement as this. So standing, it would look like this. And guess what you need to do in order to walk? One of the movements was this. If you need to climb stairs, you got to be able to lift your leg up. So yes, we're doing it seated, but it's the same strengthening exercise that you need strengthen to walk and move. Another one, straighten your knee, slowly bend. If you have spasticity in your quad muscles, I'm going to encourage you to not fully straighten, because what you might find is your leg stays there. You want it to come down and it just takes a long time, or it just stays there. We don't necessarily want that spasticity to kick in, but we do want to strengthen those quads. So maybe you're only straightening a little bit. That's fine. You can also bend further back and then come back. And same thing, alternating side to side. This is the seated version of that one I demonstrated earlier where we were talking about bending your knee. So this would be the seated option. And then the last one I want to show you, because this is one I give everyone, especially if you have drop foot or foot drop, is to sit towards the edge of your chair, and you're going to move your feet a little bit away from you, and you're going to lift one, heel stays down, everything else comes up, and lower. And then same thing on the other side. If it's easier to do them at the same time, you can lift both up. But this is a fantastic one for strengthening the front part of your ankle and your shin to lift your toes up so that foot drop doesn't limit you as much. So there's tons. It's always hard to pick some of my favorites, but those are just some ways that you can do some seated exercises either all at once or throughout the day. You can make any of them more intense, less intense based on what you need that day. All right. So Ilana, is there anything that you wanted to add based on your area of expertise and more of that meal prep nutrition side?
Yeah, so I think the main point that I wanted to make about consistency is just that similar principles apply when we think about nutrition. And so, similarly, I have a lot of my patients who will say to me, I was doing so well, but then I had this terrible day, and then I just kind of figured, well, forget it. I can't do it, or I'm not doing it. Or I had this really bad thing, at work that day. There was like cake and I ate it and now it's all over. No, that's not true, right? So what consistency actually means when we think about our nutrition is, again, same thing, that we try to make an effort every day, and just that we do our best. And it's not always going to be perfect, and that is perfectly okay. Okay, so our next learning objective was to review some tips for successful goal setting and become familiar with some healthcare and community professionals who can help us. So, if you wanted to work on changing your diet, how would you get started? I think the first thing is to think about what your goals are. So, you can start with questions like how we started that polling question today. What am I actually trying to do? What am I hoping to achieve? Um, there are many different ways you can do this from like a behavioral health standpoint. And Gretchen's going to tell us about the SMART framework, which I think can be applied to really any goal that you want to set. You want to be thinking about what you want to do and what's possible in the short term, and what you want to do and what's possible in the long term. So we're going to talk about that more in a moment. I think some helpful tips are here, and I think can address some of the barriers that we identified in our polling question. So one thing is to include your household in your plans. So I hear so much over and over again, well, I want to do this, but my partner only eats X, Y, and Z, or my kids only want to eat chicken nuggets. Do not let those things stand in your way. If you want to have a healthier diet, that is something that your whole family can benefit from, right? And so why not actually include everyone? Why not have a sit down in your house and say, hey guys, this is something that's really important for my health and it's important for your health too. And so this is something that we can do together. I can tell you this from experience. I have 4 children at home, and because of the work I do and how much I've thought about this, everyone in our house eats pretty healthy, and everyone eats the same meal at dinner every night. So it can be done. Um, but you have to kind of engage them, and we can definitely, those are things that we can help with. You want to aim to make positive changes that are really going to become your lifestyle rather than looking for a quote diet. A lot of people have the idea like, oh, I'm going to try out this diet. A diet is like something you do for, a couple of weeks or a couple months until you get tired of it or bored of it or annoyed with it, and then you go back to your old habits. Whereas if you can aim to make changes that are actually just going to change the way you approach food, and the same thing I think goes for exercise and physical activity, if you build these habits and you just make them part of your life and part of what you do, those things are much more likely to stick than things that can be temporary, like a diet. Practice makes progress, right? So again, it's not going to be perfect, and that's perfectly okay. You can start small and then you can just build on changes day after day, doing your best. And the more you do these things, the easier that they'll get. We'll talk about things like meal prepping and stuff like that. The more you do them, the more you practice it, the easier it gets. Asking for help is really important, and Gretchen will give us a list of people, at the end that we want to talk to about these things. But just some very brief suggestions are talking to your primary care doctor, arranging a visit with a dietitian. If you follow at an MS center, you can ask if there's a staff member who's able to counsel you about diet. Even if the MS center is not lucky enough like ours to have a dietitian on staff, there may be someone in the practice who is knowledgeable about nutrition and can help you. And I think the last thing that's really important in terms of getting started, and I think this applies to diet and to exercise, is to be kind to yourself. You cannot expect that every day is going to be perfect in terms of your habits. And as long as you are making progress and trying to do better, I think that you should feel like you're doing a great job. Okay, so a couple of things to think about. One is managing accessibility and financial concerns. So these are things that come up a lot. I have people, who tell me, I'm in New York City, and will say, like, in my neighborhood, there's not a grocery store that I can get to easily that carries healthy food. It's mostly processed stuff. And so ways to get around that are to look up to see if there are farmers markets in your area. Those are, I feel like, more and more common, especially in areas that are otherwise underserved. You can consider using a grocery delivery service. There are tons of those now, and I think more all the time. And that can also help you with some of the other issues that we're going to talk about, like managing fatigue. Making good use of the freezer. So if you have trouble getting access to fresh produce or getting access, on a very regular basis, this is a tip that we'll use again in some of the other sections. Frozen vegetables are like a wonderful tip, because when you think about it, vegetables are frozen at their peak freshness. And as long as you buy ones that are otherwise unprocessed, they're very nutritious, they're very healthy, and they're often not as expensive. And so that's another wonderful way to deal with accessibility issues. So managing the cost of healthy foods comes up a lot. And there are some great ways to deal with this. So budget-minded shopping, I think, is really important. And again, using frozen vegetables and fruits can be really helpful. Things like canned beans, pantry foods, you can definitely buy some of these in bulk. Using canned fish can be very helpful. Looking at what the weekly sales and specials are, using big box stores for your big staples, all of those can be really helpful. It's important to know what resources there are around you. So local food pantries, making use of those and community kitchens when needed. Um, there are so many budget-focused recipes. Making good use of leftovers, that's a huge tip, not only for managing cost, but also for, dealing with fatigue. And making sure there's always something healthy around, right? The best lunch for tomorrow is an extra helping of tonight's dinner. So that's like a good, easy tip all around. And again, turning about in terms of resources, well, right now we have obviously huge government problems, but in general, making sure that you know about SNAP and other benefits that you might be eligible for to help you with cost. But overall, I would say a very important thing to think about is that eating healthy does not have to be more expensive. And what a lot of my patients have found, for example, I was just talking to one of the participants in our study, and he was saying, I cannot believe how much my grocery bill has gone down because I didn't even realize how much money I was spending on all of these processed foods and actually eating in a way that's more healthful and buying things that are more fresh, especially with using frozen vegetables. It really is actually a lot less expensive to prepare food for yourself than it is to eat stuff that's processed and pre-prepared. Managing fatigue was the biggest thing that came up in our polling question, and I think the biggest thing that comes up in my practice. So here are just a couple of tips. There are many more, but here's a few tips that I think people find helpful. One is meal planning. You want to, set out to plan your meals and to prep things at times when you have more energy. So most of us know, like, what are my best times of day or what are my best days in the week? When do I actually have time to do this? And so, spending time preparing ingredients. So, chopping things, or like partially cooking the meal or even entirely cooking the meal at a time when you have time and have more energy is a really great tip and really helpful. Also important to utilize your freezer. So when you are cooking something that seems amenable to freezing, that's a wonderful time to double your recipe and put, half of it into the freezer. And so when you have a day when you're super fatigued and you really feel like you can't cook, even if you were planning to, you have something healthy in the freezer that you can take out so that you're not eating, takeout or something prepackaged. Grocery delivery service, also a great way to help manage fatigue. It, eliminates all of the fatigue that comes out of actually going to the grocery store, shopping for the groceries, and then carrying everything home. Using simple meals. Not everything has to be a big production. There are wonderful, nutritious, delicious meals that you can make that are super easy. For example, sheet pan meals. This is one of my favorite things to do. If you take a couple of, fish fillets and stick them on a sheet and you put the vegetables around, stick a sweet potato in there. You can put some foil around it if you want to make that even easier. And you just, you know, um, put some olive oil, drizzle a little bit of olive oil, salt and pepper, stick the whole thing in the oven, and that's it, right? That's like a very easy thing to do that doesn't require a ton of energy. Um, Looking for recipes that are one pot type recipes so that you don't have a huge cleanup afterwards, or using this, what we call set it and forget it technique with like a slow cooker. You can dump all the ingredients in and just close it and be done. Using pre-chopped or pre-measured ingredients. So again, I've talked a lot about frozen vegetables and fruits, and I'll keep bringing those up. But you can also buy stuff that is not frozen, that's fresh, but that's already chopped or already measured out, and that can be helpful in terms of dealing with fatigue. Similarly, using meal cuts or other of these kinds of shortcuts. Something that's really important is that we don't want you to be afraid to ask family and friends to help. A lot of us, I think, have family or friends who ask, how can I help you? Like, what can I do? Well, this would be something tangible that you can ask people to help you with. Hey, it would be really helpful if you could come with me grocery shopping, once a week. Or if you wouldn't mind coming over for an hour and helping me do my meal prep. This is like a wonderful thing that people can do for you that's tangible, but you have to let them. The other thing to keep in mind is that following a healthy diet pays you back in terms of managing your fatigue because you will feel better if you eat food that's healthier. Cognitive issues, another huge thing that comes up. People feel like they have difficulty keeping organized or following a recipe. So we have a couple of tips for that. One is to prepare ahead. So you definitely want to plan your meals and snacks ahead of time. And it's really helpful if you can record those in either so many apps out there, or if you're a paper and pencil kind of person, then you can, use any of these kinds of planners that are out there on the internet. There's so many options, or even just a notepad, and just kind of jot down what you want to do so that you don't forget, make it easier for later. Definitely want to keep a grocery list, and you want to keep your basics on hand. Um, Again, this is the time when grocery delivery is really helpful because you can use the reorder function and just click, click, click the stuff you ordered last week, or when you made that meal last time. And so that just makes it easier to make sure that you're not forgetting anything. Other tips in terms of handling cognitive issues. So while you're actually cooking, this I think is the biggest tip, I think, for anyone in terms of making cooking more simple and less stressful, which is to set out all of your measured ingredients before you actually like turn anything on or start mixing anything up. Is to actually sit there and measure things out. And that way you don't get flustered when you're in the middle of doing something and then you say, oh, where is that? Or where did I put that? Or how much of this do I need? And then have to go back to the recipe 10 times. So if you actually read through the entire recipe at the beginning and set all this stuff out, people say this is what differentiates like a real chef from everyone else. But I think this is really, really helpful tip for staying organized. I would also recommend setting timers for every time sensitive step. I personally always set timers just because I feel like there's so much distraction going on in my house and so many things happening that if I don't set a timer, even if it's something for 2 minutes, I will forget and the thing will be ruined. So setting a timer for anything that's time sensitive. And then if you're using a recipe, it can be really helpful to just, you can make copies of it and you can just, check off the steps as you complete each one. So then you don't have to remember, like, did I do that already or not? That can be helpful. And again, keeping it simple, using shortcuts whenever possible to reduce the number of steps that you need, and having a number of meals that you would say are like your go-to meals that you've prepared before. The more familiar those are, the easier and less stressful it's going to be, and the less likely you're going to be to forget steps. Um, Next thing we wanted to go over is how to handle like implementing and maintaining your healthy diet if you are dealing with mobility issues or coordination issues. So a couple of things. One is that while you're actually cooking, there are a number of adaptive cooking utensils out there, and I would highly recommend looking around for some of these or asking friends and stuff for things that work for them. You can see here in the pictures there's a couple of examples. So one is like a glove that is protective. So if you feel like your coordination is not good enough to cut and you don't trust yourself to hold with a hand, you can use this glove that will prevent you from actually cutting yourself if you slip with the knife. So that's super important because we want everyone to be safe. You can see the cutting board here that has like pegs in it so that you can use that to steady food if you only are able to use one hand to chop. If you can't chop at all, you can see here like OXO makes, and there's other brands too, make a chopper where you can just throw everything in and it'll chop it for you. You can put different settings for depending on how like finely or coarsely you want something chopped. And then on the top here, you can see a universal opener. So that's really helpful for opening tops off of things and jars and stuff like that. But there's so many tools out there, pretty much to handle like almost any issue that you have. I highly recommend sitting down for steps where that's possible. A lot of times people feel like they have to stand in the kitchen and they're just moving and they're standing and they get really exhausted. Um, um, or they're not able to stand at all. There's actually no reason why you have to stand when you're cooking. You can absolutely sit down, and you should sit down. You can use a cart to move items around the kitchen. That's another one. A lot of people feel like, okay, like I can sit here and do this thing, but then when I need stuff from there or there or there, I can't get it. So again, if when you start, you put everything on a cart and then you can just move the cart with you so you don't have to try to carry things. If you use a walker, this will make it so much easier. Taking breaks, really, really important. While you're eating, there are so many adaptive plates, bowls, and utensils out there, again, that can be helpful. And I would highly recommend, if these are things that you struggle with, that you consider working with an occupational therapist for more tips and for stuff that's really specific for you. Okay, so I'll hand it back over to Gretchen to talk about how to apply goal setting to physical activity and exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're running a little behind on time, and I've been keeping an eye pretty much constantly on the chat and the questions, and you guys have such great questions. So I do want to make sure we get to at least some of those. So when it comes to goal setting for physical activity, one thing that I mentioned earlier was lowering your expectations. Again, I think so many of us grew up in this time or mindset of go big or go home, put 100% effort in. And for a lot of us, even MS aside, but especially when you have MS, that's just not attainable. Or it might feel fine as you're doing it, but then later that day or the next day or the next 2 or 3 days, you realize, whoops, that was too much. It felt fine when I was doing it, but clearly my body did not like that. And so when it comes to goal setting, number one thing is what is realistic for you? How much time realistically based on your energy levels, your symptoms that day. So your what's realistic for you will likely change day to day, even hour to hour. But before you're exercising, ask yourself, how much time do I have right now? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 15? Is it 30? Is it an hour? There's no right or wrong, but how much time do you have? Realistically, in that time, or with how much energy you have, how many exercises can you do? Is it one? Is it five? Is it seven? Again, no right or wrong answer, but what's realistic? When is it realistic for you to do this? If you're planning in advance, is it realistic that you can do this routine in the morning, before lunch, after lunch, during your lunch break, before dinner? I know so many people with MS that by 3 p.m., they're just done. They know that they cannot exercise after that point. I also know a lot of people with MS where nighttime is actually their best time and they wait until then to exercise. So, what's realistic for you? And do you have rest time available as well? Because rest breaks, as Alana said, rest time during exercises, meal prep, whatever it is really important. So first and foremost, let's get realistic because if realistically you have 7 minutes that you think you could exercise, and you're going to do two exercises, and you actually do them, that's going to feel so much more motivating, and you'd be more likely to stay consistent after feeling motivated rather than if you're trying to fit in a 30-minute routine in only 7 minutes, and then you feel like a disappointment because you didn't do what you said you were going to do. Then another thing to think about is what are your preferences? When it comes to MS, of course, we've talked about neuroplasticity things to activate neuroplasticity, functional exercise versus traditional. But at the end of the day, movement is important. Movement of any kind is going to be better than nothing. So, what do you prefer? If you hate exercise classes, don't do a class. If you really like swimming, go swimming or even just walk in the water and hold on to the edge. Do you like doing individual exercises throughout the day or a routine all at once? Do you like the stationary bike, the recumbent bike, Tai Chi classes, whatever it is? Great, do that. Something is going to be better than nothing. And if you enjoy it, you're more likely to stick to it. So, Ilana mentioned I would talk about SMART goals. And again, this can be applied to any goal you have. I'm relating it to exercise right now, but it can be nutrition, it could be hydration, it could be calling your best friend to stay connected, it could be showering, it could be anything. So, SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So, ideally, with any goal you have, you're going to have an SMART for that goal. So, this was the example that I put together. Instead of just having the goal of, I want to walk better, let's get more specific. So, we would say, I want to increase my walking strength and endurance. Well, great, but how? That's where the measurable comes in. We're going to do that by building up to walking 20 minutes per day. Is this achievable for us? So, yes, by starting with 5-minute walks twice a day. And then is it relevant? We're going to, so that we can walk around the park with my family. And then time. what's their time frame for this? It's always best to have an estimated time for the goal. Even if you don't hit it, you still have something that you're working towards. So in the next 6 months. So again, if we put all this together, instead of just saying, I want to walk better, we're now saying, I want to increase my walking strength and endurance by building up to walking 20 minutes per day, starting with 5-minute walks twice a day, so that I can walk around the park with my family in the next 6 months. That is going to give you such a clearer image of how to reach that goal and what to do versus I want to get stronger. I want to walk better. Next slide. All right. So we do have a lot of questions, some in the chat, some in the Q&A. Jessica, do you want to start us off with those? Oh, you're on mute.
That would be helpful. Thank you both for presenting so much great information. We are at the top of the hour, so if people have to jump off, feel free to leave. You will get a recording of this tomorrow, so you'll get even any questions we answer. I'd love to ask both of you just like 1 or 2 questions if you're okay to stay on a couple more minutes. Because like Gretchen said, we do
Yeah,
have
of
quite a few
course.
questions.
I tried to start answering some of the things I saw in the chat and
Yeah.
some of the things I saw in the Q&A I replied to, but happy to
I
answer a
know
couple
there's a
more.
lot of good ones, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna pick a couple just to try to get to. So let's stick with Gretchen. Um, how do you gauge how much to do with exercise when you have such changing limits? So a lot of people don't know that they've overdone it until they've overdone it, and then they're in trouble and they're, trying to recover.
hmm So first of all, you're definitely not alone. This is a very common thing that a lot of people with MS suffer from because it feels fine when you're exercising. It's not until 2 hours later, the next day, 2 days later, where you're like, oops, I guess I shouldn't have done that. So one of the best things that you can do, because MS is ever changing and so variable, is write down and keep track of what you're doing because there might be some days where that's fine, but there might be other days where that routine was not fine. And on those days, it's really important to be able to look back and see, okay, how can I modify this? So, just a quick example. If you felt fine during your exercise, but now it's later that night, you're not feeling so hot, you're super fatigued. If you had exercised for 30 minutes and you did 7 exercises, 10 repetitions of each one, let's modify one thing of that. Could you do the same routine, but just 6 repetitions or 5 instead of 10? Could you do the same routine but add more rest breaks? So instead of taking 30 minutes, it takes you 45, but because you're resting more in between. Could you do fewer exercises instead of, I think I said 6, maybe choose 4. So you're modifying that. And then how did it feel after you changed one thing? If it felt okay, that might be an indication that that might be a good plan for you to keep moving forward. I always recommend having 3 different intensities of plans. A plan that you can do on your best of days, a plan on your worst of days, and a plan for medium days. It's a really hard thing to navigate, but you're not alone in that, and keeping track can be really helpful.
Thank you, Gretchen. All right, let's move over to Alana. So we have some questions about late night eating. So how do you feel about it? How to maybe avoid it? And then if you are waking up in the middle of the night hungry from not eating enough, what should you reach for? What might be the best thing to reach for?
So this is one of the ones I was just answering. So my biggest piece of advice would be to try to do your best to eat more during the day. Um, I do not feel good about late night eating for several reasons. One is that just from like a comfort standpoint, most people, if they eat late at night or in the middle of the night, are going to just get indigestion, which is going to interfere with your sleep quality if you just eat something and then lay down just from like a mechanical standpoint. Um, but I think things that people might not be aware of is, we all have this circadian rhythm and our bodies kind of want to do certain things at certain times of day. And our bodies really want us to eat during the day and not to eat at night. Sleep is a very active process and it's very important. It's not just a time when your body like shuts off, it's actually a very active like recovery time. And so there's a lot that your brain needs to do to recover from the day. And so if you eat late at night because your metabolism is not really matched to handle that, you can have these like wild swings in your blood sugar during the night. And you can really interfere with your body's natural recovery processes by trying to make it digest food at a time when it's not really set up to do that. So my biggest recommendation, if you're waking up hungry during the night from not eating during the day, would be think about why you're not eating enough during the day. Is it because you're too busy? Is it because you're not prepared? And try to think about, what are the ways that I could maybe do better to make sure I'm getting good nutrition during the day. Um, some people really just, maybe don't feel well at certain times of the day or are too exhausted around dinner time and then find themselves hungry later. In that type of scenario, I would suggest eating a small snack before bed, that is high in protein, something like a handful of nuts. And so at least then that way you won't have like the wild blood sugar swings. A lot of the reason why you might wake up hungry in the middle of the night is if you ate something with a lot of carbs and not protein or fat, before bed, your blood sugar is going to spike and then it's going to plummet. And when it plummets, that's when you feel hungry and when you might wake up, from that or wake up even sweaty or something because your blood sugar is low. So if you are going to eat something, before bedtime, I would do something that's very small that has some good protein in there.
Oh, thank you, Alana.
Yeah.
I think that is all that we have time for since we are a couple minutes over already. So I just want to thank both Alana and Gretchen for such a wonderful presentation and answering all these questions and being as thorough as they possibly can be. So thank you both. One more thank you to our sponsors here. And make sure to tune in next month for our last one of the year, Emerging Therapies, a research update on multiple sclerosis. And then if you can, please take the survey for today's webinar. I will drop that in the chat and it will also be going out in that email that you will get post-program. Otherwise, thank you all so much for coming and I hope to see you again soon. Hope to see you at another webinar or another program.